Today's video has got a scary content warning because I am chopping up my tomato plants. It's okay, it's not actually that scary. Come on. Obviously pruning tomatoes is something we do right through the season, but we do pruning for different purposes and in different ways at different types. And right now, in mid-August, I'm starting to change the purpose of my pruning. Now obviously we're a whole big worldwide gardening community and we all share what we're all doing in our gardens.
Now that's quite a coincidence because I'm pruning my tomatoes too.
So if you're relatively new to growing this particular crop, it can be difficult to work out what you're meant to do, when you should be doing it, why you're doing it, when you're watching folk from all over and their different environments. For instance, as you can see, it's quite dull, it's not particularly warm, but our good old gardening buddy Scott, just over the fence in Colorado, has completely different weather at the minute.
It's hot. Some days it seems like we spend more time in the shade enjoying a beverage than we do actually working out in the garden.
So here, my garden in Scotland is 56 degrees north. I get very different weather and temperature from even our neighbours down south in England. But I can get different temperatures and weather from neighbours just across the country on the west coast of Scotland. So you kind of need to know your garden and what's happening. I mean, okay, comparing my garden to Scott and Colorado is quite extreme, but it shows the point really well. Even those of us here in the UK, we can all be getting very, very different weather. For instance, all the fabby YouTube gardeners down south in England just now, they will have fantastic ripe tomato harvests coming in, way better than I'm getting. And it's simply because it's much warmer down there for much longer. June for us was glorious. It was so warm, warmer than normal. It was a brilliant June. But it got slightly colder in July. By the end of July, however, things got very cold. We had a couple of weeks spell, the end of July, beginning of August, where I kid you not, our highs were 14 Celsius. That was our highs. Overnight, we were seeing the temperatures drop to 9 Celsius. So regular tomato growers know that's not ideal temperatures for growing tomatoes and it can actually stall their growth. But worse than that, those are temperatures where your tomatoes won't ripen. Now thankfully it's warmed up a little bit now. We're now seeing 17 and 18 and sometimes 19 degrees as our highs during the day. But it's quite cloudy with it. We're not getting an awful lot of sunshine. We're getting quite a bit of wind and quite a bit of rain. So now I'm changing how I think about pruning. Before, you guys have seen me prune all year. I did a lot of emphasis on, I pruned quite low down to the ground to make sure there was lots of space and lots of airflow to help prevent disease and pests, that kind of thing. As the year's gone on, I've kept everything very, very neat. I've deliberately kept all my tomato plants growing to one stem, so one single cordon stem, because even when it was lovely, I was very aware that as my season progresses, if I allow my plants to get too big, too vigorous, and have too many trusses for potential fruits, that takes a lot of energy. And as we go on into the year, the plants are going to actually struggle to turn all of those flowers into viable fruit to ripen. So that's been the year up until now for me. Scott, what's your focus been on your pruning?
It's normally pretty hot in my garden in August. An average day where I'm at is about 27 degrees Celsius. But you have to remember, I'm at 7,000 feet elevation. Most of my pruning is just to keep my tomatoes under control. They grow so well in this hot environment that sometimes I can't keep up with it. In a bed like this one, I'm pruning to direct the growth of these tomatoes. These are the same tomato varieties that Eli and Kate are growing. And so I've pruned off the lower branches. I'll prune off any of the side suckers that are interfering too much with the growth of the other plants. And then I take my tomato clips and attach them to the twine so that I can direct their growth upwards and out to the sides.
Okay, so far we're kind of the same then. We've got the same ideas in mind, although Scott can let his grow multiple stems because his amount of sunshine and heat supports it for his plants. Now is where we're going to get different. So now we're in mid-August and I'm thinking about when my season's going to end. Scott, when does your season end?
2 years ago, during the 3rd week of September, we had a 2-day period where the high temperature went from 24 degrees Celsius to a low temperature of -8 Celsius. Yes, you heard that right. That was enough to kill everything in the garden overnight, and my season was over. That's a bit unusual. I can usually take my season into the 1st week of October, and so usually about the 1st or 2nd week of September, I change my pruning practices to topping the plants.
Okay, so we're a wee bit different then because mine doesn't just come to an end like that. Yes, we will get our first frost maybe the 3rd week in October, and that will be it. It'll be a goner for the tomatoes. Basically, a hard frost can kill them, and we get very hard frosts. But my season doesn't just end then for my tomatoes. From now until then, our summer and our temperatures are now gradually decreasing every day. So from now until then, it's going to keep getting colder. We may not get hard frosts until October, but it'll certainly be cold enough and dull enough that it'll affect how many of these flowers will turn into tomatoes, how many of those tomatoes will grow to the proper mature size, and how many of them will be able to ripen before it's too late. So, it usually means I end up with an awful lot of green tomato chutney, which is not the end of the world. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and encourage as many ripe tomatoes as I can. And I simply do it with some quite serious pruning, like this. This is a stupendous example to show you of what I'm going to do. This is one of my sun golds. Look at all these gorgeous tomatoes that are on there. I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trusses of tomatoes on there, and you can see at the bottom the trusses are full of tomatoes, and as we go up you're getting a mix of tomatoes and flowers, the more immature trusses near the top. Now what I have to ask myself is, how many of these trusses will this plant be able to turn into proper sized tomatoes and ripen in, say, the next month, say? Because as you can see, the plant goes all the way up and there are more trusses of flowers forming. Realistically then, are they going to be able to produce all of those tomatoes? Well, if it helps, there's an old traditional gardener's way of doing things in the UK, and it's this. With your tomato plants, if they're outdoors, you would top them, or you would completely cut the top of the plant off above either the 4th or 5th truss of tomatoes. You make that choice. So if you're down south, you might go for 5. If you're further up north, you might go for 4. But the idea of that is simply that you're topping it to a point where you think, okay, I can get all of these tomatoes to ripen. So that's why you do it. Obviously, if you make a lot of green tomato chutney, you may be okay with lots of green tomatoes. I'm going to focus on getting these to ripen. So I'm going to do that out here. Now, the ones down here, these two are looking pretty far on. This one has started ripening. So I'm going to say, I'm going to be optimistic. This plant is huge and I don't want it putting all of its energy into all this stuff up here. So I'm actually going to chop it right above this final 5th truss here. And fingers crossed, that's going to let the plant put all of its energy into focusing on those tomatoes, getting them nice and big, getting them ripe and juicy. It's quite severe. Are you ready? So just above this truss. Now that's a lot, look at this. It might seem quite severe, but when you live in a cold climate, sometimes you have to garden a little differently to make things work for you. So that was my sun gold. This is my black crim. So same idea. This truss at the bottom, I've got one tomato that's ripening now. And I've got this one here that's ripening. I've got this. There's flowers here that will become trusses if I leave them, but there is no way this can grow to these sizes and get ripe in time in the next month. It's just not going to happen for me. I know my garden well enough. So I'm going to take this plant above this truss. Again, it looks crazy, but I really want my focus on those tomatoes now. The thing is, if you grow in the greenhouse, then a greenhouse gives you a few weeks extra either side. So you might want to make that decision one more truss on. So instead of topping your plant at 4 or 5, you might do it at 5 or 6, because there's more chance of getting those to ripen.
Good girl, bring it. Good girl, good girl.
Keep the noise down,
ready?
you.
Ready, go. Okay, you ready? This one's gonna be farther. Go.
Aye.
Well, I guess we won't do that anymore.
Now this year my greenhouse is particularly full because I'm doing all these experiments with the tomatoes. So I've actually got 2 extra indeterminate tomatoes. I've got this Barry's Crazy Cherry, which is in this Oasis box, and I've got this black crim tucked in here in this Oasis box. I've also got extra peppers and an aubergine on this side. So it's actually quite difficult to get you a good view, but the thing I wanted to show you is this one here, my Barry's Crazy Cherry. This is known for producing enormous trusses of tomatoes. I mean, you can see here, easily you can get over 70 on a truss. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of time for the plant to create all these full-size fruits and ripen them. So with this plant, I need to be quite severe. I don't know if you can see, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trusses with a lot of tomatoes on them, and there are more trusses here that are just forming. There's absolutely no way this plant can maintain all of this and give me all of these ripe tomatoes. So this one, I need to think differently. We spoke when we were outside about the old traditional way of doing things, with taking things down to 4 or 5 or 6 trusses, depending where your plant is and where you live. This one, there's no way it can give me 6 trusses of this fruit all ripened. So I'm actually going to have to lose some of these fabulous tomatoes, I think. So let's start. If I undo this clip, so in here, you saw outside I used the Florida Weave trellising system for the tomatoes outside. In my greenhouse, hang on, in here, I've got everything trussed on strings that are attached to my greenhouse and held on with these little clips. So I've just taken that off because I'm going to start here. I mean, that is a lot of tomato I've taken off, but there is no way it's going to give me all of those tomatoes. It just can't. And while it's trying to do it, it's taken all that vital energy away from the ones that are lower down. So this is what I'm doing, is I'm wanting to make it focus on those fruits that I want ripened. So yeah, seems severe, but in my situation, it's for the best.
On the hottest days of summer, it regularly gets up to 30, 32 degrees Celsius. And while it's difficult to keep the temperatures down in my greenhouse when it gets that hot, it's wonderful for growing my tomatoes. In fact, they grow so well that my primary duty during the summer is just pruning off the branches that are sprouting.
So how do you know if this is for you? Well, I'm always reminding you guys, don't just copy people on YouTube because they have YouTube channels. It doesn't mean they know what's right for your garden, no matter how big our channels seem to be.
A smudge? Someone's been touching my plaque.
Instead, go with your gut on your garden. This, for me, is about my current temperatures and the projection of what I think my temperatures are going to do up until the point where I just can't garden with tomatoes anymore. Scott is different from me because he has different temperatures and lots of sunlight at the moment. What about you? When is your first frost going to hit? Are your tomatoes indoors or outdoors? What's your temperature now, and how long are those temperatures going to last? Are you thinking about the end of your tomato growing season being in September, being in October? Maybe you're thinking further on than that. Or maybe you're not bothered and you'll happily take whatever the plant gives you, regardless of whether it's ripe or it's still green, and regardless of the size, because you've got plans for those green tomatoes. So this is all about you making decisions about your garden. Us weirdos on the internet can give you advice and tell you what we're doing, but you need to be brave and do your decisions. And if you want a bit more advice on this kind of thing, pop over and watch Scott's video, because he's thinking about the same sort of things as me. See you, folks.